African people historically been perceived as a threat? This question strikes at the heart of global history, yet it's rarely examined with the depth it demands. Let me clarify. This discussion isn't about fostering division or diminishing any group's significance. Instead, it's an unflinching examination of historical realities, an exploration of why African people and their descendants have so often been regarded with apprehension. This is my own interpretation, recognizing that no one can fully grasp the motivations behind these perceptions. My aim is to identify recurring themes, pose challenging inquiries, and analyze how these age-old perspectives still influence the lives of people of African descent today. This isn't a plea for pity or approval. It's about comprehending how the past has molded our current world. So, settle in, because we're about to unravel some enduring myths about Africa. Before we proceed, I'd like to connect with you. Many of you joining me today come from diverse corners of the globe, united by an interest in African heritage. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below so we can engage. If you're finding this content valuable, a like and subscription would be immensely appreciated. Now, let's return to our exploration. The power of truth and the fear it inspires. It's often said that truth carries immense power, a power that can unsettle those invested in maintaining certain narratives. Since the dawn of recorded history, Africa hasn't merely been a continent. It's been the birthplace of humanity itself, the soil from which all human life sprang. But what happens when the world is forced to confront that the very people it has systematically marginalized are, in fact, its progenitors? This realization sparks fear. Long before the transatlantic slave trade, before the chains and the falsified textbooks, Africa was revered not just as land, but as a beacon of advancement. The Nubians, the Kushites, the people of Kemet, they were architects of cities, innovators in medicine and astronomy, chroniclers of time. Their wisdom wasn't mere folklore. It was etched in stone, embodied in monuments that endure to this day, defying both time and deliberate omission. This legacy unsettled the world. If the earliest humans were black, if the first great civilizations were African, if the foundations of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy were laid by dark-skinned people beneath the equatorial sun, then every subsequent chapter of history must reconcile with this truth. Placing Africa at the center of human achievement disrupts the fabricated hierarchy of racial superiority. It reveals that those who claimed to discover the world were, in reality, latecomers to knowledge that Africans had long mastered. This notion, that blackness isn't peripheral, but foundational, is destabilizing in a world structured on inequality. If Africa is the origin, then dominating it isn't just about seizing land or labor, it's about controlling the narrative itself. Even ancient observers acknowledge this. Herodotus, often called the father of history, described Ethiopians as towering, formidable, and intellectually advanced. Arab travelers marveled at the sophistication of African empires, while Chinese chroniclers documented kingdoms rich in art, law, and spirituality. Yet admiration soon gave way to unease. The more the world witnessed Africa's brilliance, the more it feared what that brilliance implied. A power independent of Western hegemony, a legacy too potent to erase without force. So the narrative was twisted. Africans were recast as savages, their deities dismissed as pagan, their traditions labeled backward. Their accomplishments were buried, sometimes literally, beneath foreign museums and repurposed monuments, because to acknowledge Africa's primacy would be to admit the world's debt to it, a truth too dangerous to confront. This isn't merely historical reflection. It's about why the mere presence of African peoples still unsettles systems never designed for their equality. The erasure of African excellence wasn't incidental, it was deliberate. This story doesn't begin with oppression, it begins with origins, and those origins are neither frail nor fragmented. They are formidable. And for centuries the world has sought to suppress a power that refuses to seek permission. The paradox of the black body, revered and feared. There's a reason the black body has been simultaneously idolized and dreaded, mythologized for its strength, yet brutalized for its autonomy. From Caribbean sugar plantations to American cotton fields, African bodies were viewed not just as labor, but as latent threats encased in muscle, rhythm, and relentless endurance. Colonizers framed Africans in contradictions. Strong but simple, resilient but docile. These weren't observations, they were propaganda tools. By magnifying African physicality while denying African intellect, oppressors crafted a pretext for exploitation. They're built for toil, they claimed. They feel less, they endure more. These lies weren't born in isolation. They were threads in a global tapestry of dehumanization, woven to justify subjugation while masking a deeper terror. What if African strength ever merged with self-determination? Consider how black excellence has been commodified yet contained. Athletes break records but face scrutiny. Soldiers defend nations that deny them dignity. Musicians birth genres that others appropriate. Even in triumph, African descendants are met with disquiet because excellence unchained undermines systems of control. This fear isn't new. Roman texts hailed Nubians as indomitable warriors. Arab traders extolled East African stamina. European slavers, even as they brutalized Africans, fixated on their physical prowess. Over time, this dread morphed into the superhuman African myth, the backhanded compliment that reduces black people to athleticism while erasing their complexity. It's why a black man's walk through a neighborhood becomes a threat. Why black women's bodies are policed yet paradoxically deemed too strong to need protection. The African body has always been a battleground, literal and symbolic, because strength coupled with consciousness is unstoppable. For centuries, systems have labored to keep African power reactive, not revolutionary. But that's shifting. Across the diaspora and the continent, we're reclaiming not just our past, but our present, because the body isn't merely flesh, it's culture, spirit, and politics. And that's why the African body has never been just strong, it's been strength incarnate, and uncontrolled power is what empires fear most. Knowledge as a weapon, the war on African thought. Oppression isn't always physical. Some of the most devastating assaults on African people targeted their intellect. Long before colonization, Africa boasted thriving centers of learning: Timbuktu's libraries, Great Zimbabwe's engineering, the Dogon's celestial mastery. Yet today, many schools reduce Africa to slavery's starting point. Why? Because knowledge is power, and African knowledge dismantled colonialism's core lie, that Africa was uncivilized. So libraries were torched, griots were silenced, languages were outlawed. Imhotep, the true father of medicine, was erased from history. Timbuktu's 700,000 manuscripts, treatises on law, astronomy, theology were disregarded. Ancient Egypt was rebranded as a Western marvel, its African roots obscured. The goal was clear. If African intellectual sovereignty were recognized, white supremacy would crumble. How can you claim superiority over people who pioneered surgery, algebra, and cosmology while your ancestors shivered in huts? How can you enslave those whose worldview honors the sacredness of life? So they barred enslaved Africans from literacy. They rewrote textbooks. They demonized African spirituality as witchcraft and dismissed African science as superstition. But our stories survived in song lyrics, in oral histories, in hidden rituals. Now, they're resurfacing in African-centered education, in the revival of ancestral healing, in scholars reclaiming stolen legacies. Because once you grasp Africa's genius, you see why it had to be silenced and what happens when that silence is shattered. The unbreakable spirit, resistance as a global constant. Fear has shadowed African people wherever colonialism has touched, not because they were weak, but because they refused to break. From slave ship revolts to Shaka Zulu's military ingenuity, from the Dahomey Amazons to the Maroons' unconquered communities, African resistance has been relentless. But resistance wasn't just armed. It was spiritual deities hidden in saints' statues, escape routes woven into hair. It was cultural hymns repurposed as freedom songs, drum beats carrying coded messages. This defiance made Africans ungovernable. How do you enslave people who draw strength from ancestors? How do you dominate those who find purpose in struggle? This terrified colonizers because oppression relies on submission, yet African resistance proved you could be enchained but unbroken. Today that spirit endures in Ferguson's protests, Lagos uprisings, global calls for reparations. It's why resistance is still labeled dangerous, because it exposes a truth that shakes power structures. Freedom isn't given, it's taken. And African people have always known how to take it. The modern threat, Africa's uncontainable future. Colonialists may have left, but their systems linger. Today, Africa, with its youth, resources, and cultural sway, challenges the status quo. Corporations pillage its oil and diamonds, yet Afrobeats tops charts. Nollywood rivals Hollywood. African tech innovators disrupt industries. This is why African identity still unsettles. It defies categorization. It's not just geography, it's a force that rejects exploitation. The more Africans embrace their languages, traditions, and spirituality, the more they expose a power that hierarchies can't control. The world must now reckon with a truth it long suppressed. Africa's legacy isn't past, it's present, and that's the most threatening truth of all.